The topic I brought for my final word concerns a phenomenon that happened in the commercial music sector, which has characterized our last decade, the rebirth of vinyl. It has been welcomed by the media as a real surprise if we consider the historical period in which we are now, where technologies have influenced our daily lives and consequently the way we produce music. The most important major labels, after the rise of the MP3 format in the early 2000s, had to give up the production of records to adapt to new trends. Multimedia markets such as iTunes and Apple Music are born, and recently streaming services such as Spotify and SoundCloud. YouTube itself is still a great vehicle for the spread of music, and it was subject to copyright restrictions only a few years ago. It is in this context that we have the rebirth of the vinyl record, which had a steady growth in the last 10 years and gained a considerable share of the market in relation to the fact that it was a product that disappeared for many years. We are going to see how this situation came about, starting from the history of this format, which was one of the inventions that characterized the lifestyle of the last century. The first inventor of a recording and reproduction system was Thomas Edison, who in 1878 patented the monographic cylinder. This product quickly spread over the next 20 years, and the recording and reproduction equipment became a commercial sector in great development, with the most important titles that sold millions of copies already in the early 900s. The first production companies of the monographic cylinder, such as Columbia Records, competed for the market and consolidated themselves with the arrival of the 78 RPM record. The gramophonic record was patented by the inventor Emil Berliner in 1889, and in 1910 it surpassed the sales of the monographic cylinder because it was easier to produce and transport, and also because you had the possibility of storing the records in a sort of music library. Berliner founded Berliner Gramophone, which produced 70 RPM records, and Edison, in order to regain the market, had to found his own label, which produced 80 RPM records. In 1925, the speed was standardized at 78 RPM. This format remained the only one until the 50s. Until this moment, the records were produced in shell. In 1948, the Columbia Records introduced the new material, the vinyl, also introduced the new formats 45 and 33 RPM that replaced the 78 RPM, becoming the only format used until today. Now we're going to see some of the record companies that have contributed to the spread of the vinyl in the world. We have already mentioned Columbia Records, which is the oldest record label among those still in existence. Founded in 1888, it used as audio support pre-recorded records that were already competing on the market with Edison's monographic cylinder. Then we have the RCA, founded in 1929 under the name of RCA Victor, which in 1931 released the first 33 RPM record in history that contained the Fifth Symphony of Beethoven. The RCA then arrived in Italy in 1949 under the name of Italian RCA, and it was active until 1989. During the first period of activity, it dealt with publishing US records. Then we see how in the 70s it launched great songwriters, among the most important in Italian history. The vinyl record is until the 60s the only format existent. From the 70s on, new formats were born that progressively replaced the vinyl, like the cassette, which had a great spread thanks to the first Walkman Sony that allowed you to listen to music even while away from home. In 1983, it was published the first CD in history. This format, as we can see from the graph showed in the orange part, it is the most widely used audio format until 2010. And we can also see how the music sales exponentially widens during the 90s, reaching $14 billion in sales in 1999. These data are provided by the RIAA, which quantify the record sales in the United States. In the 2000s, with the spread of the MP3 and computer, the music commercial sector collapsed due to piracy, and some websites, such as YouTube, that allow an artist to promote himself without record labels and without having to publish any record. The most important major labels have to deal with this situation and organize in multimedia markets, so iTunes and Apple Music are born, multimedia platforms where people can buy and download the original songs files. Recently, the most used digital platforms are streaming services such as Spotify and SoundCloud and MySpace, and records have gradually disappeared. It is in this context that we can see the increase in sales of vinyl records, which had reached an all-time low in the early 2000s. In fact, in 2004, vinyl record sales covered the 0.2%, $19 million of the total sales that reached $12 billion. In 2010, we can see how the number grew up to $100 million, covering 1.8% of total sales. As we can see from the graph, the growth has been constant in the last 10 years from 2008 to 2018, when the peak was reached with $400 million in sales, about 4.3% of total sales, an extraordinary result if we consider that we are in the era of streaming. We have seen the US sales, but as we can see from these graphs, where sales are indicated per unit, how they have also increased in European countries such as England, Germany, and Italy. This has been possible for various reasons. The media have promoted in the early 2000s the turntable and vinyl records as good investments. Furthermore, independent vinyl sellers and record stores have been able to take advantage of the internet and multimedia markets. In fact, most part of the sales are on websites such as eBay, Amazon, and Discogs in particular. Discogs is a website where you can find almost all the discography worldwide, where the sellers are collectors or online record stores that have overcome the crisis of the 2000s and now are going through a positive period, also thanks to the shipments to other countries. Very important is the Record Store Day, a world day dedicated to online record stores. Record labels have courageously begun to publish limited editions of new artist albums, spreading the vinyl culture to the younger generations. Music lovers agree that from a technical point of view, vinyl sounds better than a simple MP3 file. Vinyl is an object that is not part of our present, so we can consider it like a picture of the 800s or a vintage car. It is no doubt that it is one of the inventions that characterize the lifestyle of the 900s, like photography and cinema. Like these art forms, it has the ability to capture a moment of life, but I think it has something more important because it has the ability to convey emotions and stimulate our imagination in a major way. From an economic point of view, we can also consider it as an investment for the future because having a turntable at home with vinyl records, it means having in our hands one of the first technological inventions of the history.